Welcome to the Mets Pod. On today's show, checking in on the rotation. Max Scherzer on the IL, Jacob deGrom trying to make his way back, as well as Tylor Megill. So who's going to step up, and are the Mets going to make any moves this early in the season? The revolving door at DH, Dom Smith, J.D. Davis, on and on it goes. And a little check-in, is Pete Alonso actually putting together an MVP campaign, a popular topic right now? Francisco Lindor busting a lot of narratives around him and his slow start to his Mets career as he heats up in the 2022 season. We're going to check in on the farm system, and as always, we are going to dive into your mailbag questions. So reminder to subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And a reminder, the Mets Pod comes to you once a week, every single week, as we break down the big league club, the minor league system. We'll have on guests a ton of times, and we will be here all season and going into what is going to be a wild offseason. So stick with us and subscribe to the Mets Pod. All right, the Mets coming home from a mini road trip in San Francisco, a bizarre 3-day swing in San Francisco where they only took one of 3 games, and now they have multiple division series on deck. So, Joe, it's been a little bit of a rare up and down part of the year for the New York Mets right now as they finally are starting to split some series, lose some series. For the first time, and a lot of it is probably injury related, this team is looking vulnerable. So how are we doing? And where is our pulse right now on these first place New York Mets?
That's exactly it. They're still the first place New York Mets. Like, I understand they lost the series in San Francisco, and obviously the middle game was, good thing I don't stay up late for West Coast games. Like, if you know me, you know I don't stay up for West Coast games. Just not my thing.
You give it a shot.
I give it a shot.
Until there's a hit.
Yeah, like fourth or fifth inning. That's typically where I draw the line. So I missed the great comeback, and then obviously the loss there at the end. But when you think about it, the Mets are obviously still in first place. They have a pretty solid lead there. It's the first time that the Mets have lost back-to-back games since April 11th and 12th. That's a real long time. And I don't think it's maybe not being so appreciated because, fans live in the moment, and it's just like right now they have injuries. They lost the series, West Coast stuff. Like it definitely puts a bad taste in people's mouths, but I think they're still okay.
Yeah, as you and I sit here and record on a rare Mets day off, this team has a 7-game gap in first place in the National League East. Now, it is early. We have not even hit June yet. We know everybody's fear about June and the Mets. We know the Mets are dealing with some frontline injuries, not some depth injuries, but guys, obviously the potentially the most exciting 1 and 2 punch and a starting pitching rotation in baseball in Max Scherzer and Jacob deGrom are both down right now. But this is why you try to build a little bit of pad when you can, and the Mets have done that while the division has been poor. It's as simple as that. This division, they are fortunate. They are in a division that has gotten off to a significant slow start, and it's not just the Nationals who we expected to be bad this year. The Phillies, who we expected to have their problems, and the Marlins, a younger team, but even the Braves as well. So that's why you create this pad. But right now, Joe, I think the most pressing conversation around the Mets as a whole, and this is one that we had last week, and it's a good time to check in again, because when we had the conversation last week, it was really about lowering expectations for deGrom's return, checking in on Megill and how you keep your head above water with that. But now Scherzer as well, and we saw this team try this a pucky route, give him a chance. David Peterson looking really solid this year when called upon. I think right now this is something we're hammering home, Joe, as some of the fan base calls to make a move, is that this team just has to tread water until really they get Megill back. I know we would love Scherzer and deGrom to be pitching in June, but the reality is, at least in my eyes, this team, with the gap they've created, with Megill back in the rotation, they can be fine until they get their 2 aces back in the fold.
Yeah, you need Megill back, and he's throwing on flat ground at high intensity, so he should be heading to a mound soon. Buck Showalter said he would probably have to make a rehab start or two. So McGill's seemingly getting closer, but it's not like, this week or it's on a complete right on the precipice.
And I think they want to be cautious with a young guy, right?
Yeah, of course. You don't ever want to rush, in my opinion, any pitcher back, even for a need, because when you're dealing with pitching, it's how these guys get hurt, and then if you bring them back too soon, they hurt something else when they're making up for what else is bothering them. So you just have to have a little patience. But McGill should be back soon, and like you said, they have to tread water because we're heading into Memorial Day weekend, and like it or not, even the teams that are eventually going to be sellers are not selling yet. So you can't get something that's not there. You can't create a market out of thin air. And to be honest, it's probably the last thing you want to do anyway, because if you go to a car dealership or you go somewhere and you're desperate, you need something bad, they can charge whatever they want for retail. So if you go to, let's just say, the Cincinnati Reds or the Oakland A's, because the Mets reportedly have scouted some arms there, they're not ready to actually deal those guys off quite yet. That's probably another 3+ weeks away before they start thinking about it. But if you do call them now, it's like, okay, you want them? Then let's start with Brett Beatty. And then it's just like, oh, whoa. No, we don't want to do that. So it's, obviously the Thomas Szapucki thing did not quite work out in his first go against San Francisco. And, they're testing their depth a little bit at this point.
I think, too, back to your point about you can't really just explore a market that doesn't exist, is that when you look at it, there's a couple layers to it. One, the really bad teams, as bad as they are, and they probably already signaled to their clubs and their fan bases that they're out on the season when they don't spend any money in the offseason anyway. But trading those guys now is the ultimate signal to their own clubhouses that they're waving the white flag, and that is just unacceptable. And then the second part is something you said, Joe, is that they want to wait for the market because they want multiple teams in to drive up the price. Right now, there aren't multiple teams looking for impact ads. Really, the Mets are in a unique situation, and it's not, I can't emphasize this enough. It's not Panic City. It's not Code Red. Like, the Mets have a 7-game lead in first place, and I think this is a good time to transition to talk about this team's identity as a whole. They are one of the, they consistently fight every single game, even when their starting pitching doesn't give them a chance. Look at Chris Bassett's start this week, right? Bassett, who's been one of the most reliable guys to wear a New York Mets uniform this year, has a bad start. It happens against a good Giants team, against a good Giants lineup, against Jock Peterson, who went full Kyle Schwarber out of nowhere. There's nothing you could do about it. And the Mets, as much as they lost the game, they fought inning after inning after inning, and I think that a lot of it probably has to do with Buck. A lot of it has to do with the veteran makeup in that clubhouse and the fact that they have talent. It's as simple as that. This, to me, Joe, and I will gladly admit I was wrong if 3 weeks from now things look different. This, to me, Joe, this team's mental makeup from the top under Buck and the talent they have, they don't view these injuries, I think, the same way that fans might view the injuries where, oh, we lost Scherzer for a couple weeks, it's over, we're screwed. I think they are going to go out there and guess what? They might not be winning every 3 out of 4 games. That is hard to sustain no matter who's out there. But can you hang a little bit above 500 and then you get your big aces back in July? I think you're going to be okay if that's the case.
Yeah, and I don't see why they can't, because I just think it's a really good baseball team. Like, right? They have components in the lineup. They have components coming off the bench. They have some bullpen pieces. Edwin Diaz blew a save. It's going to happen, bound to happen. But I still think there's some pieces in the bullpen that can work. And Carlos Carrasco has pitched well this year. Taijuan Walker had a great start in Colorado his last time out. And if you get McGill back, if David Peterson
looks good.
It looks fine. He's going to be I think he's a fine fill-in on the back end of that rotation. There's no reason why they shouldn't be able to tread water. And, like you said, this team fights. It's at the point where when they had that big comeback against Philadelphia, I, from then on, said, no matter what the Mets are down, I'm not counting them out of any game. Like in Wednesday's game, when Szapucki gave up 9 runs, I was like, all right, the odds of coming back from 9-1 down aren't too high.
But there's a chance.
they've done it more than once this year. So I watched that game, just waiting for the breakout, and the breakout typically happens. It's always started seemingly by a Francisco Lindor home run. So when Lindor hit the home run yesterday, I was like, here we go again. We're working our way back, and it didn't happen. It's not going to happen every time, but it's a resilient team. I've said this before on the show. It's probably a very annoying lineup to face, just because guys are putting the ball in play, guys are working counts. So yeah, I think it's a team that's going to hang around. I don't think, over the next 3 weeks, like you said, I'll admit if I'm wrong, but I don't think over the next 3 weeks, they're just going to, lose 75% of their games or something and just fall off a cliff just because, Max is down.
So speaking of the lineup, I think one of the big talking points around this team, because it's funny, when you watch a really good team play consistently, ironically, the talking points we always have are about the potential issues, right? Nitpicking the issues. We start the show off with, how does the rotation tread water for now? And that was really a hot topic last week as well. Then you look at the lineup, and I think the big question right now is there going to be stability at the DH spot throughout this year? And there didn't have to be stability, right? I don't think fans look at this team and go, man, they need one guy that's the DH every day. But if that isn't the case, then they need some kind of production from the platoon of J.D. Davis, Dom Smith. You're obviously giving guys a rest from playing in the field and throwing them in the DH spot, as we've seen with Pete this year. We've seen with Lindor at times this year, and Escobar, and even Marte, giving him some rest as well, an older player in the outfield. So I think right now, Joe, the most interesting thing to me in this lineup as we get away from the rotation is a bit of a revolving door at DH, where it doesn't seem like a clear-cut answer has revealed itself. And there's been flashes, right? You've had multi-hit games from Dom where you go, okay, is this going to get him going? This week, we saw the big one from J.D. Davis, where, now I'll say this about J.D. I think in the beginning of the year, when things were really slow for him, he was hitting the ball hard. And there was a lot of bad luck outs where you go, I don't think J.D. Davis, it's not a situation where he doesn't look like himself. I think he's just running into some bad luck. And maybe now this is when he catches fire. But your numbers are what you say you are. And right now, J.D. Davis has an OPS below 700. So he needs to get going to earn majority at-bats in the DH. Then you have Luis Guillorme, who has pretty much the same amount of at-bats as JD and Dom, and is getting on base at over a 400 clip, is batting .324. More of a contact guy. He doesn't have the same pop that JD has. Dom doesn't bring that pop element at all anymore, so he doesn't really weigh into that argument over Guillorme. But Guillorme is such an interesting player because of how many positions he can play in the field, and now the bat looks really, really good. So, Joe, I'll frame it to you like this. Do you think the DH situation is just rides out like this in this revolving door all the way until the deadline, where maybe a more clear answer presents itself that you get on the cheap? Or do you think the Mets at some point have to give one of these couple of guys a legit shot? I'm not saying every game, but I'm saying 60, 70% of the games where they can get in a groove and try to get something going, and if it doesn't work out, then at least you have your answer that option at DH is an external one. It's not on the team.
You would think the prudent move would be at some point to just ride a hot hand a bit. Like J.D. Davis had the huge game in San Francisco where he had 4 hits and they didn't play the next day. So you would think at some point in time they want to give an extended look to somebody. But I do truly believe they're playing matchups and they're playing day-to-day, and they're okay with saying, all right, we don't have an everyday DH right now. And, if Dom Smith was hitting .330 like Luis Guillorme is, Dom Smith would probably be the near everyday DH, or do a straight split with Alonso and he'd play some first and Pete would DH. But Dom's not doing that. So at what point do you say, all right, he's had a really good day, let's ride it out? And then if he has, how many bad days in a row need to follow that before you go, okay, let's put the other guy in? So I think it's actually a pretty complicated calculation that Buck has to work through. But I will say when we look ahead to the trade deadline, which is so far away that I hate to even talk too much about it.
It's like, half our mailbag every week, man.
Yeah, it is.
It's half the mailbag.
People are always looking to get better. That's what the fans are looking for. But to me, I think the designated hitter role or something to that effect should be one of the top priorities as we move through the summer, because something tells me you're not going to get consistency out of Dom Smith or JD Davis. And a guy like Guillerme, love the way he's playing, but we've seen this before too with him, where he'll have spurts of really, really good hitting, and then he finds his way into a near everyday role, and the offense kind of fades back a little bit as he continues to play. I think he's just a premium backup infielder that maybe gets a little overexposed when he plays too much. So it's a tough one. I don't envy Buck's decision, but right now I would say you probably feel a little better with JD Davis in the lineup than you do Dom Smith. I mean, you're looking at, I try not to overrate the expected statistics, but JD Davis is top 5 in baseball in expected batting average. So while his stats have not lined up to date, the data underneath suggests if you gave him more of an opportunity, you might have a better chance of that more consistency.
All right, well, someone who has been consistent and ironically is pretty adamant about not being a DH, even though he seems to produce every time he's there, is Pete Alonso. And I think an interesting conversation kind of kicked around recently. A lot of it from the Mets booth, but I think it's a conversation that, kind of started to spread about Pete Alonso being a potential MVP candidate. And I think when you look at Pete's numbers this year, beyond the numbers, too, I'll say this, Joe, there's something seems different about Pete. I think he's had better at-bats. I think that he's worked counts a little better. I think he is using the opposite field as a hitter, not a slugger, and that's a compliment. That is varying his approach, varying his game, that when you get into an at-bat or you get into a situation in terms of a count where you go, you know what, my chances of hitting a home run here are probably pretty low and striking out might be high. If I go the other way as a hitter, not a slugger, I might be increasing those chances of making things happen. Right now, as we sit here, Pete has 200 plate appearances, already 11 home runs, 41 RBIs. He's hovered, he's been at the top. He's hovered around the top of league leaders in that category. An 840 OPS. He is getting on base at a 340 clip, batting 275. I think at first base, he's been solid. So right now, this is, I think what we forget about with Pete, admittedly, because he came up as a youngster, 24 years old, in a season where we didn't even expect him to be here. He hit the 53 home runs. He had the 941 OPS. He had instant success. Pete was an instant star in New York. We forget that now Pete, at 27 years old in his 4th MLB season, could be entering his prime and getting even better right now, Joe. And I think that's something that I admittedly even take for granted at times on a veteran team, forgetting how young Pete is and that his ceiling is not even tapped into yet.
Yeah, I mean, he may not go much above 53 home runs in a season because that's obviously a massive number. But like you said, his overall skill set as a hitter, it's a different player. I mean, you have the at-bat against Seattle that everyone went nuts about him chasing the sliders from Diego Castillo in the dirt, but you're seeing a lot less of that. Still happens. It happens to any hitter. I mean, try stepping up against a 92-mile-an-hour slider and tell me if you're swinging at it. So it's not exactly easy, but like you said, he's going the other way a little bit. You're seeing the liners the other way. You're seeing home run power to all fields. Seems like he's coming up in clutch situations for the most part pretty good. I think, like you said, I was going to say he's entering his prime, but you said it before I could. He's at the age where you're getting the best Pete Alonso here for the next 3 or 4 years, I think, of just an overall skill set. And, we always complain about the shift, right? It's like, oh, they're shifting, and you just see a lot of lefties just hit it right into that second baseman that's standing out in right field. But with Alonso, all right, they're shifting against him, but if he continues to use that right side, the shift will not be as extreme. And then that'll open up more opportunities for him to be able to pull the ball and actually have somewhat of a hole to pull it through. So is he putting together an MVP campaign? I mean, right now he has to be in the conversation. He's, the best hitter on one of the best teams in the league. So that to me is the recipe of being an MVP.
I actually disagree with you there. And this is why I wanted to have this conversation. I think the Mets' best hitter is Jeff McNeil. And I think it's and I know what you're saying, Joe. You're somebody that, and this is the right way to, value things. The power Alonso has is what makes him the Mets' best hitter. And I think with McNeil, my argument is, sure, he's only got 2 home runs, which is a good thing for Jeff McNeil. We have learned in the past. We have seen when he gets home run happy that it really weakens his overall approach. But McNeil right now, that 829 OPS, batting 321, getting on base at a 374 clip. I mean, I think McNeil, to me, hitting so routinely in the 7th hole or the 6th hole to start the season, now him being bumped up, I think Jeff McNeil is the Mets' best hitter. And I think Lindor and Alonso might have more value in a sense because of their ability to drive the ball, drive in runs. Lindor can steal bases. But I really wanted to selfishly use this segment to just give Jeff McNeil the love he deserves because I don't know where the Mets are without McNeil's bounce back right now. And they are deep enough lineup that they'd still be a really good team. But McNeil is the player, especially now with opportunities, whether it's batting 5th, whether it's batting 3rd. I would like to see him honestly live in that 2 or 3 spot in this lineup. I think he's the guy that if I had to vote one Met to be on the All-Star team right now, I would give my vote for Jeff McNeil.
I think that's very fair. And you're seeing kind of a different attitude out of Jeff McNeil too this year, I think, which is a great thing. He's not selling out for power offensively, which is great. Like if he hits 10 to 12 home runs, that's perfectly fine. I think that's kind of where I want him to be. But you're not seeing so much when he gets out the reactions that you saw last year when he was just having a tough year with the injury and everything he was going through. You just saw frustration left and right. It seems like even if he gets out now, it's just like, okay, I'm going to go get it next time. And he's been getting it the next time. That's the thing. So, yeah, Jeff McNeil's totally back. And no, you have a sound argument. He is probably the best pure hitter on the team. I think that's probably the best way I would put it. But like you said, from a value perspective, there's a couple other guys that bring a little more to the table. And we forget about Brandon Nimmo too. I mean, I know everything he's doing, he's been fantastic. I believe he's 2nd in baseball among center fielders in WAR, only behind Mike Trout. So Brandon Nimmo is a serious player. McNeil's a serious player. And then obviously Alonso, Lindor. You know what that tells me? The Mets got themselves a pretty damn good team.
They really do. And the fact that we have this conversation and we don't even bring up guys like Starling Marte, who hasn't truly gotten going yet and will get going. Canna has been really solid as well, but Escobar has not gotten going at all. If Escobar's back gets going, this is a different lineup from a power standpoint and what they can do. So, and you brought up Lindor. We will get to that in a minute because that's been an interesting conversation. But a reminder, you are listening to the Mets Pod. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So, Joe, I want to talk about the farm system in a little bit, get a little update there. But before we do that, we just gushed over the lineup. We talked about the revolving door at DH. We talked about McNeil as an all-star, Alonso as an MVP. We barely brought up Francisco Lindor in the conversation. And this is a guy that the scrutiny, the eyeballs on him, which is all in part because of the contract. We know that this is what this is all about. We're at the point with Lindor where, especially this year, but if you take away May of last year, the start to last season, Lindor has been, for the most part, the guy the Mets thought they were going to get right now. And it goes back to being a different kind of shortstop. We know he has the Gold Glove. We know the kind of defense he has. We know he can run. He could steal some bases. He could be a true 20-20 guy. But that element to me, Joe, the power from the shortstop position, the ability to drive in runs. He now has 33 RBIs on the season, Francisco Lindor. He has been either a rally starter or continued rallies over and over again. Obviously, a presence in the clubhouse that I think everybody's really excited about when you see him interact with his teammates, when you see him fire guys up. But I think the narrative around Lindor, Joe, to me, is one of the most frustrating things as a Mets fan, because I just think it's BS at this point. I think Lindor has, sure, maybe he hasn't been a superstar yet in the Mets uniform, and when you get that kind of contract, those are the expectations. But Lindor has been a really, really good player and a huge piece of the identity change of this franchise as a whole that's gone on in recent history.
It's entirely based on the contract. There's nothing else that you can frankly say, in my opinion. Like you said, outside of the slow start last year, and then he started really hot for this season, and then he had a slump, and then he's bounced right out of it. He is what Francisco Lindor has basically always been. Like you said, it's a 20-20 guy. He should win a Gold Glove here if not this year, he's probably going to win multiple Gold Gloves in his time as a New York Met. It's got to be based around the contract. And everyone's like, well, we're paying him $341 million. He should be Juan Soto. He's not Juan Soto.
No one is.
Yeah, that's just kind of the way it goes. He's not Mike Trout. He is a different kind of player that brings his value from an overall standpoint. He's never going to hit 300 plus for you, and that's okay. Not everyone does. It's not within his skill set. But if he's a 260, 270 hitter, get on base, hit 20 to 25 home runs, steal 15, 20 bags, play Gold Glove defense, whether you want to admit or not, that's what an all-star shortstop looks like. And we're talking about a guy that right now leads National League shortstops in WAR. So
that's all you need to know right there.
By purely value, Lindor has been the most valuable shortstop in the National League. And if you listen to the way some fans react, you would think that they had like Omar Quintanilla out there instead of Francisco.
Good callback, Joe. Yeah. Good callback. Omar, I thought you were going to go with Ruben Tejada or.
I love Ruben, but
Omar Quintanilla.
Yeah, that's what you would think. But Lindor's a great player. He just brings his value from an overall standpoint, not so much like I am going to be the best in the league at this offensive category. He's going to be good in all of them. His defense is, I think, really what's going to be the biggest difference maker as we continue on. Had the throwing issues a little bit earlier in the season, but the range, the coverage, and like you said, the clubhouse leadership. I think everyone goes to Lindor. He's clearly the leader in that room, and he's made for New York. He's got the personalities. To me, I think Lindor's been kind of what I expected, and maybe my expectations are different, but to me, he's what I thought the Mets were getting.
And I think you can learn a lot about a guy in their post-game pressers, not how they react after they're winning, but how they react after they're losing. And every time the Mets lose a tough game, which has not been often this year, it's Lindor that you're seeing the clips on social media always posted, and he always says the right thing, and he's always available, and he always speaks up that I need to do more, or he's that kind of guy. So you and I have been, big Francisco Lindor fans well before he was a New York Met, and it's just nice to see him really finding, I think, a groove here with this team, because he's going to be here a long time. All right, getting away from the big league club, a lot of the conversation right now has been around your forte, Joe, the minors, because the Mets have dealt with a lot of injuries, and it just has a trickle effect. It has the trickle effect of, is there anybody to call up who's getting promoted, maybe from single A or double A, in the effect of those call-ups and opportunities? So, Joe, what are a couple of things that are standing out to you in the farm system right now? It doesn't have to be, hey, this guy's on the way, he's going to be the help that they need, because I think that's a little unfair to expect right now out of the system in terms of arms. But it could even be something in the lower levels of the system.
Yeah, there actually was quite a bit of action in the last week in the minor leagues, and I'm going to stay away from Francisco Alvarez and Brett Beatty and Ronnie Mauricio. We could talk about them all the time. Yeah, they're pretty good. I'm going to stay away from them. But Jordan Yamamoto, who we spoke about last week, so not exactly prospect per se, but that starting pitching depth that we're considering, actually pitched yesterday for Brooklyn. So he's on the way back. So that gives you an option. A guy like Connor Gray has been very good in AAA Syracuse. He's a guy the Mets actually signed out of independent ball a couple years ago, and he's made the rise up to AAA. He's gone 17 scoreless innings in his last 3 starts. So he's a possibility if you're looking at needing someone instead of Thomas Szapucki the next time through. Maybe you add a guy like Connor Gray to the 40-man roster. But sticking with Syracuse, the call-up of outfielder Jake Mangum, I think, is something to really look at. He was leading Double-A Binghamton in batting average when he got called up, which, again, that includes Alvarez, Beatty, Mauricio, those guys. Jake Mangum was the leader in batting average on that team. And so far, he's only played a couple games in Syracuse.
Hot start, though, right?
Hot start. He's reached base 5 times in his first 2 games. And I actually mentioned him on Mets Perspective recently as, a future 4th outfielder type that it would not shock me if the opportunity arose that he were called up at some point this year. And his skill set from a general perspective is a lot like Travis Jankowski's. It's bat the ball skills, it's speed, it's defense, it's hustle. And yeah, I think Jake Mangum's definitely a name that you should keep your eye on. And Last one I want to touch on is Mark Vientos, one of the top prospects in the system. And it is now officially a trend. For his entire career, Mark Vientos has struggled in the first month of seasons at every level. So it's not necessarily a cold thing, no matter where he is. He's been slow out the gate. He's been a habitual slow starter now. And the second month, Mark Vientos looks like the hitter last year that was one of the best hitters in all of minor league baseball. For the month of May so far, he has an OPS over 1 or 1,000. I had that debate with Doug Williams at one point, whether it's 1 or 1,000. I go with 1, but either way, obviously a huge number there at OPS. He has 5 home runs. You're seeing that hitter that we talk about, the designated hitter. That could be a future role for Mark Vientos because he's playing third base almost exclusively in AAA Syracuse. He's had a couple games at first, but he already has 9 errors at third. So defense is not his forte. He can hit though. So maybe
we got good news for you, Mark Vientos. There's a wide open job in the big league club.
Yeah. So he can hit. He's got the pop. I think he's a guy that he can hit 25 homers at the big league level. I definitely believe that. He has some of the best exit velocities in the system, consistently barrels the ball up. Yeah, Mark Vientos and Jake Mangum are 2 guys right now in AAA Syracuse that I think bear watching.
So let me piggyback off that combo. As you and I, one of the opening topics of the show is the Mets have this revolving door at DH. We don't expect any reactionary things right now. It's, maybe they start to give JD more of an opportunity, like we said, majority percentage, and hypothetically say that there's really no clear-cut answer by the deadline, and maybe they don't make the move at DH that they want. They focus more on bullpen and maybe get a 5th starter or something along the lines of that. Is there any shot that we see Vientos here in, say, August this year if he heats up the way he did last year, where he was one of the best power bats in the minors at his level from what I remember?
Yeah, he was. And I think it's possible. Sure. I mean, look at what the Mets did back in 2015 when they called up Michael Conforto in midseason. And that was like a trade deadline acquisition that made a huge difference in their run to the World Series. So while, yes, the Mets will explore the veteran market as we get closer to the deadline, guys like JD Martinez could become available, maybe Nelson Cruz, guys like that. I'm sure they'll pursue that type of market. But if the fit isn't there or the cost is too high, no, it wouldn't shock me at all if Vientos continues on the trajectory that he's going right now and he continues to hit through the summer. He's on the 40-man roster. That helps his cause. I think he absolutely can force his way onto the team.
All right, so let's dive into the mailbag here. It's a good transition from the farm system talk. This question was from Zero, who said, any insight into Connor Gray? Could he be the 5th starter? I know you briefly mentioned Connor Gray throughout that, Joe, saying he was a guy signed from independent ball. Is this feel like a McGill situation all over again, or what is the situation with him for a 28-year-old in the minors, right? So we're talking about a guy that maybe found it pretty late in his career in terms of, he was a 20th round pick from the Diamondbacks. There's really no expectations for a guy like this with such a strange road. Is this somebody that, at that age and that recent success in Syracuse, it sounds like even in a long relief role, we might see this year?
I definitely think you could see Connor Gray. And he's a guy that, to be totally transparent, coming into the season, he wasn't on my radar as a guy. Like, he was on my radar. I knew about him, but he wasn't on my radar as like, all right, he's on my list of guys that I expect to see in the big leagues this year. Enough injuries have warranted the possibility. It's not a McGill situation. I feel pretty comfortable saying that. He doesn't have this. He doesn't have the stuff that McGill had. I mean, he's got an uptick in velocity from what he was previously throwing, but that really means like he's topping out at 94 now. Okay. So he's a low 90s guy. He's got a solid breaking ball, and he's working on a changeup that has had some good results, and it's got him that 3-pitch mix. And like you said, maybe he's, a long reliever, spot starter kind of guy, but it's a guy that 3 months ago was not even in my mind as someone who could potentially pitch for the Mets this year. So good for Connor Gray. He's definitely made some progress this year. And like I said, he's thrown 3 scoreless over 17 innings in his last start, 17 scoreless innings in his last 3 starts. I transpose those, but he's been good of late. And certainly when you see a guy like Thomas Sapucki give up 9 runs in 2 innings, you certainly are looking for, okay, can we try something else next time?
And I'll say this, because we mentioned him, we talked about maybe surprise relievers coming up in the system, surprise arms coming up from that Syracuse team. Colin Holderman now, 6 innings, scoreless right now. So we have Colin Holderman watch going on the Mets pod right now, but it was an awesome week for him after you mentioned him as the guy, Joe, that you think could be the surprise to come out of that club and help the Mets bullpen right now. All right, one more mailbag question today before we close out the show, and this one from Dan B, who asked, the Mets are 11-9 over their last 20 games. Surprisingly, their division lead has grown by 2.5 games. Still, what's your level of concern on a scale of 1 to 10?
Like 2 or something?
Wow,
like,
that is jarringly low considering we're entering June.
I'm not concerned right now. Maybe I'm naive and it's going to absolutely blow up in my face. And historically, we know what June has done to this Mets team.
Yeah.
But I'm confident with Buck Showalter at the helm. I think it's a different thing.
There's a Cameron Maybin in the June lineup last year.
Yeah, there's a Cameron Maybin
batting.
A Cameron Maybin batting third in a June lineup.
There you go. I shouldn't single out Cameron Maybin.
Yeah,
it was a lot worse.
Oh, yeah. If you go and look up, just search for lineups this time last year, and you're going to go, oh, boy, how are they still hanging out in first place?
Syracuse lineup with Francisco Lindor batting fourth.
Exactly. But to me, my concern level is not high with this team. I think, I've said it, I think this is a good baseball team. Obviously, they have injuries. Injuries are a part of the game, man. I mean, look at what the Yankees are going through on the other side of town. They've been getting hammered with injuries recently.
All at once. Yep.
Yeah, all at once. So the Mets they're just going through a tough spot from an injury perspective, but their lineup is pretty healthy. And we talked about all the players in this lineup that we feel good about. They need to score. Like we can talk about the starting pitching as much as we want. We could talk about Connor Gray and Thomas Szapucki and Jordan Yamamoto and these guys that are filling in the interim. But the reality is, if they could score 5-6 runs a game or get, around that average, they're going to win more games than they're not, almost kind of regardless of who's starting. So get the offense on a consistent level, keep them healthy. And I have no reason to believe this team can't make it through the June swoon, get into July, maybe get those 2 big arms back. McGill will be back likely before those guys. And then at that point, you're now evaluating the trade market of, okay, what do we need? Do we want another setup man? Do we want a DH? Do we want another starter? Did something else happen? So I think they're okay. I personally don't have any concern, but I know certainly when you come off a series loss and losing 2 games in a row, the attitude changes a bit.
Yeah, certainly. I think listen, the June schedule is tough. The Mets have injuries like everybody else, and I know some people argue, well, deGrom and Scherzer aren't injuries like everyone else, but you knew going into this year with 2 veteran arms, were they going to start you 34 games this year? I think everybody would take the under on that. So I think when it comes down to it, they got to find a way to win. For the most part this year, they've always found that way to win. They've always gone the extra mile. They've always found the way to pick somebody up when one part of the team is down. That's just how it goes. So this is, like you said, Joe, it's okay to say this is a good baseball team. This is a lineup that has all-star caliber players in it. This is a rotation that even after deGrom and Scherzer and McGill's going to be back soon, that Carrasco looks like himself again. Taijuan Walker is starting to look like the all-star guy from a year ago, not the second half guy. So, and once again, a shout out to David Peterson, who has come up and done a good job when called upon. He's done a really good job. He hasn't had a single start that he's let his team out of the game completely. He's been rock solid. So they just have to continue to find a way to win. They need to, honestly, in these next 6 games, they need to beat up on the Phillies and the Nationals. Because then you're getting to you're going on the West Coast, you're getting the Dodgers, you're getting the Padres, you're getting the Angels. Those are 3 tough series in a row. You need to beat up on your division opponents in these next 6 games. Continue to build more of that pad. Can you get the first place lead up to double digits at some point? Then you could sit comfortably, wait till everybody gets back. So it's going to be an exciting time right now in Mets land. It is never, there's never a lack of excitement or a lack of interest in Mets land. So, Joe, closing thoughts on today's Mets pod.
We need your number. You gotta slap a number. We're going, what's 1 to 10? Your concern level 1 to 10. Where are you at?
I'll go with a 4.
Okay.
Just because, listen, they are dealing with some significant injuries on the rotation, and they don't have answers on the team right now. but I do think McGill is going to be back in time. I do think the lineup is going to pick up the pitching. And I'm a believer in David Peterson right now. It's just what's after him is my concern, Joe. But a 4 is low. 4 is nothing.
Right.
We're fine.
Yeah.
We're fine. Talk to me next week.
Yeah, exactly. Next week we'll do another 1 to 10.
We do the panic meter every week, briefly.
We might have to. We might have to, especially if they lose 2 games in a row again or something. But
no panic right now. Yeah, 2 games in a row for the first time in a month, right? So, all right, Joe, give me some closing thoughts here.
No, just I always go with this. A great show. Glad to have you back from your little getaway. And yeah, we got a big 6 games coming up here for the Mets with the Phillies and the Nats, and you gotta take some games here before another West Coast trip that I get to sleep through.
Yeah, and a reminder to everybody, classic Joe, a reminder to everybody, subscribe to the Mets Pod. We have so much exciting stuff coming your way. We have big guests on the way. We have a lot to announce in the future, and we will be doing this show every single week throughout the season. We will continue on through the offseason, which is somehow just as interesting as the regular season for the Mets. So a reminder to subscribe to the Mets Pod. Please leave us a review with a question if you want. On Apple Podcasts, we will conclude those questions in the mailbag section of the show. So a reminder to subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you next week.